fourth pick in the NBA draft goes to the Chicago Bulls.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Sportscaster and her son, where sports bridges the gap between the generations. I'm the older generation. I'm the mom, Peggy Kaczynski from ESPN Chicago, and my co-host is my son, Jason, who is also a sportscaster at WIBW in Topeka, Kansas. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Mom. How's it going?
It's good. It's good. So this is our once a year episode. I'm kidding. On NBA basketball, the Bulls and the draft lottery. They got the fourth pick overall for this year's draft. And once again, we are going to talk about why I don't watch Bulls basketball anymore. And we're going to have a guest on who tried to talk me into watching a couple years ago. And I think I may have watched a couple of games since then. But Jason, your thoughts on the draft lottery?
Yeah, the only way it could have went better for the Bulls is if they got one of the 3 picks higher. I mean, to land in the top 4 in this draft, given the context of where the Bulls are at as a franchise right now, I mean, that really it's the most important moment for the Bulls since landing the first overall pick in the Derrick Rose draft. And now the most important question is, who do they take with the 4th pick, because they really truly cannot screw this up now that they got this lottery luck and are in the top 4 of a draft that has a clear top 4 players. You really can't screw this up. So couldn't have went much better though.
Well, let me tell you this, Jason, not that I'm negative Nelly or anything like that, sour Sally, downer Debbie Downer, whatever, but you know, the Arturas Karnisovas era began back in 2020, and the Bulls had the 4th overall pick, and they took Patrick Williams. And so now I'm supposed to be excited about Bryson Graham as he starts taking over as Executive Vice President of Basketball Operations for the Chicago Bulls. AK and Mark Eversley are gone. We don't know who the coach is yet. We don't even know what style of basketball they're going to be playing yet. But I'm supposed to be excited that they can't screw this up. I'm hopeful. Let me just put it that way.
I think a lot of it has to do with, this is a really good draft. It's not a really good draft. It's a fantastic draft. It's a once in a decade draft, truly. And so, you know, to compare it to the 2020 draft, it's a similar spot for the Bulls because they really have to nail the pick, but there's just way more talent available. And especially the players at the top of this draft class are super special. You know, if the Bulls end up with Caleb Wilson, that's a guy who you can build around for the next decade. Cam Boozer, maybe not as much, but still a premier talent. Darius Acuff, a point guard, projects maybe as the next Kyrie Irving. So the Bulls are in the driver's seat to acquire the next future of their franchise, which, if you talk to anyone who's watched the Bulls the last few years, they need that probably more than any team in the NBA. A face of the franchise, a true, superstar. And so they have a true opportunity now to land one next month, and it's really exciting.
Do you agree that the top 2 picks are pretty much unanimous in whatever order that they go?
No.
Debanson's going to be number 1.
Yeah, so AJ Debonsa will go number 1. But, I mean, we're still so early, I guess, in the draft process. You know, we're not even a few days since these teams know where they're going to pick. There's a world where Caleb Wilson goes number 2. I don't think there's a world where Cam Boozer goes number 2, but, with the Utah Jazz picking there, they could opt to go for a more dynamic, athletic player at the 4 position like Caleb Wilson. Darren Peterson's not going to fall to 4 because there's no chance the Memphis Grizzlies let that happen at pick 3. So it's really going to be down to 3 guys for the Bulls. It's going to be down to whoever's remaining of Cam Boozer and Caleb Wilson, and then Darius Acuff, who will certainly be there at 4. So their decision is simplified for them, which is, I guess, a good thing for the Bulls, given their recent draft track record.
So how did Cam Boozer go from preseason player of the year to dropping in the draft and just, being one of the top 5 guys that no one seems to really want to say, yeah, that's who I want to build around?
I wouldn't say that he fell in the draft. I mean, he's still getting a lot of draft love, and he's going to be a top 5 pick. I just think that fans and people who watch the modern NBA are a little more aware of the prototype of player that these rebuilding teams need to build around. And the reality is, a guy like Cam Boozer is going to average 20 and 10, which is great, but he's a tweener at the 4 in the NBA, so he's not going to be the type of guy who can, necessarily take a game over and be a top 5, top 10 guy in the league. And so when you look at that, he's going to end up being one of, if not, the least productive player who you have to pay a supermax contract to. And so when you're committing that much money, that much capital, that much resources of a rebuild towards a player that will never be the best player on a championship team, it's a sticky situation. So it's not as much of a knock against what Cam Boozer has done over the last 12 to 18 months. He's a very accomplished player, and he's going to be very good in the NBA. I think that fans are just very zeroed in on the idea that he's not going to be this like Anthony Edwards, Donovan Mitchell, SGA, Tyrese Halliburton type player that'll be the best player on an NBA championship contender.
So it feels like forever that we have talked about the Bulls needing a pure shooter, a 3-point shooter, a rim dominator, someone who's just going to control the rim. I feel like it's been 10 years and we are saying the exact same thing. So what do the Bulls really need, or is it everything?
So you take the best player available at 4, and Bryson Graham made that really clear on Sunday. He said that we are not drafting for need, especially with all the talent in this draft. They're going to evaluate every position. So they're just going to take the best player available at 4. The great thing about having another first-round pick in this draft is that it's so deep. They can draft for need then at 15. They don't need to take another upside swing, or they can do both. They can both draft for need and take a guy who has really high upside. They're going to need to add shooting, whether it be Darius Acuff at 4. If you add Acuff at 4, you have to add length at 15, in my opinion. If you add length at 4, you have to add shooting at 15. So some guys who could be available there at 15. Duke's Isaiah Evans is a sharpshooter. I think that that's somebody who the Bulls could be connected to. Alabama's LeBaron Philon, I think, would be a really good situation for the Bulls for him to fall. And even Iowa's Bennett Sturts. The Bulls have been a team who historically is very apt to take Midwestern players. Denzel Valentine, Doug McDermott. Bennett Sturts is a guy, he's from Kansas City. He spent his entire college career in the Midwest. He just fits the Bulls mold. And so I'd be really interested to see what they do it for, more so what the teams ahead of them, 1 through 3, do that'll determine their pick at 4 affects what they do then at 15. But they will be drafting at need at 15 no matter what, because that pick at 4 will create a need that has to be addressed at 15.
So what happens to the guys currently on the roster? Seriously. No, I'm serious. I mean, Matas Buzelis, we were hopeful.
He's a keeper. He's a keeper.
Josh Giddey's going to be a keeper, right?
He's a keeper, yes.
Okay.
There are a few keepers. Those two. Jalen Smith. I think Jalen Smith is a keeper. He's a pretty good plug-and-play center, rim runner. He was very productive this past season for the Bulls. On a more competitive team, probably a guy who you'll bring off the bench, but centers like that are becoming harder to find in the NBA. True physical guys who can come off the bench and get you 10 points, 10 rebounds are really valuable right now. And that's who all the teams who are playing right now this deep in the postseason have. So that's my justification for keeping him around. And I was so against the pick, and I still am, and I always will be until he does literally anything in the NBA. But you can't sell low on Noah Essengay. You have to keep him around, especially with the results that apparently he's 7 foot tall now. If he is 7 foot tall and runs like a wing, you have to keep him. Then the Bulls have unbelievable length between Giddey and Buzelis and Essengay, and then assuming that they go length, either Wilson at 4 or a guy like Dalen Swain at 15, or they trade back into the top 10 for Nate Ament. Like, the Bulls are building a lengthy team, and so he fits that mold really well.
So one of the things we like to do on this podcast is really kind of point out the difference in our generations. And in my generation, you know, whether we were talking about the big man inside, like a Shaquille O'Neal, a guy that just takes up space, pulls down the rebounds.
That style of center's coming back, though. Like,
that's
we're coming back around to that.
That's what I was going to ask you, because then we started getting the Wembys and these big guy 7-footers who are playing like wings and shooting threes. So what is the trend for the NBA now?
Do it all point guard, knockout shooter, 2 wings with unbelievable length, bully ball center. That's how the modern NBA champion is built. And so teams are looking to fill out those wings. Right now is the most valuable position, both in college basketball and in the NBA. Most every NBA champion contender has a variation in style of centers. So they have multiple guys who can go in and just get rebounds and defend the glass. And then they also have guys who are a little more mobile and can space the floor and shoot threes. And so, you know, the Bulls don't really have anybody there right now. They have Jalen Smith, who I think is a good person to build around, but, you know, they need a little more variation. And they've got a good piece in Modest Buzelis, who, if they can pair him with a more physical more physical wing, who is a little bit of a better defender, has a good post game like Caleb Wilson, you know, then the Bulls have a really good young core that a lot of NBA teams are going to struggle to defend from day one in the 2026 season, because they're just going to be so athletic and quick and tough. So, you know, obviously it's all hypothetical between now and June, but it's kind of clear the direction that the Bulls roster will take this rebuild in. And I'm really excited to see who ends up in their lap at 4, because the pick at 4 will be fully determined by what happens at 2 and 3.
Well, nobody knows this Bulls team better than their play-by-play announcer. Also, the NFL and MLB on Fox Sports. Our buddy Adam Amin is joining us now on the Podcaster and Her Son, or the Sportscaster and Her Son, I should say. Adam, okay, I love doing this show with Jason, because as I just told him that I'm confused on the direction of the NBA right now, because in my day, you know, Shaq, you had these big bodies that took up the middle. And then we go towards these Wembys who are 7 feet tall, and they're wings and they're shooting. And, you know, in between we had the Golden State Warriors that introduced the 3-pointer that every guard and forward was hitting and shooting. And I'm like, wait, what direction is the NBA going? So what can we expect with the Bulls and Bryson Graham in rebuilding this team into what?
Yeah, what is the question, right? And that's going to be a very interesting, there's going to be a very interesting combination of answers over the course of the next, I would say, just in particular, like 2.5 months, because you're going to go through the combine, so you'll get all this information on prospects. You go through, obviously, we just had the draft lottery, so you suddenly have some kind of structure. The Bulls are actually, I think, in an advantageous position, because they don't have to determine a whole lot. It's a lot of it. This is going to be determined by the 3 teams in front of them in Washington, Utah, and Memphis. So they kind of get to sit back and just make sure their ducks are in a row and they have an understanding of who they might want to get. And then when free agency opens up in July, I'm fascinated to hear what Bryson Graham is going to discuss over the next couple of months, and then see what the execution is going to be. Because, as he said, this is not going to be, let's build a championship contender for the 26-27 season. This is going to be a year where perhaps you are going to make some trades around free agency and do some sign-in trades and maybe take on some bad money, quote unquote, so that you can have, you know, a little bit of experience on your roster. You can help develop the younger players that are out there. but it's fascinating to know what the league is moving towards. I think, what you guys were just talking about, body types of preferred players are suddenly a lot different. The length that we see in particular in the Eastern Conference, and if you look around some of the playoff teams right now, San Antonio and Oklahoma City, the length of all these defenders, everybody almost kind of looks the same in a lot of ways. Like it's a little bit more homogenized. But I don't think that necessarily has to be the case for what you want to build for your roster. I think you get the players that you get. You try to figure out what your profile is going to be. And by the way, the other question of this is going to be who the head coach is. Is there going to be a style or philosophy that, that coach really leans into? Is it going to be, well, let me get a bunch of guys who are between 6'5" and 6'11" and just create havoc on the defensive end? If you have a defensive-minded coach, am I going to get, let's say, I'm just using this as an example. If Tom Thibodeau were to come back, well, you're going to need some very stamina-ready players for the defensive end because that's what he's going to require of you. And is that what the organization wants from the current young crop of players that they may or may not keep? So, yeah, the next 10 weeks, I think, is going to be fascinating. And in particular, like, what are we going to see in the playoffs to finish out? What kind of champion do we end up with? Our team's going to look at whoever wins the NBA title this year and say, well, that's who we have to be. We have to be that roster because that's what we heard from the previous regime in Chicago. Well, we want to be a Pacers-like team. Every team wants to build out like the Thunder right now, but that's not always necessarily going to work. You can't, like you said, Peggy, it's great if you have Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, two of the great generational shooters in the history of the sport, playing together at the same time. Not everybody has that, but a lot of teams tried to copy that formula to varying degrees of success. So a lot of questions. I don't think it's a bad place to be. I think we have a tendency to say, well, there's a lot of questions around this team. Well, good. We should have some good questions, some structure to figure out how to build out a roster, and then try to answer each of these questions as the appropriate time comes through.
How much are the current pieces in place going to influence this coaching hire? You mentioned, they might construct this team of all guys who are between 6'5" and 6'11" and wreak all this havoc. Well, that looks pretty realistic considering who's on the roster: Josh Giddey and Buzelis and Essengay and whoever they're going to take it for. So do you think that that's going to be a big determining factor in who they end up hiring?
I think so, because you're going to need to, especially if you're going to have this personnel, you're going to have Josh Giddey for another few years under contract. You have Buzelis on a rookie deal for a couple of more years. And I imagine they're going to, if there's anybody on this roster that's going to be leaning towards an extension, he would probably be the first person that I would think about, just because he's shown you good flashes and you probably want to lock him up now. Maybe, you might be able to get him at a lower price or earlier, not now, but earlier, because you might get him at a lower price. And figuring out what you have in Noah Essengay, who suddenly is over 7 feet tall. He's very young. He's only 19, so he's still in the growth process like a lot of these guys are. And let's say it's a Boozer or a Wilson that's going to fill out, your number 4 slot on your roster at like a power forward position and grow into that position. So if that's your core, if that's the core that you're building around, and you have length and you have size and you have a unique player in Josh Giddey as a 6'8", real true forward point guard combination, then you need to probably gear your head coaching hire towards somebody that can utilize them in the best possible fashion. I think, Billy Donovan, to his credit, really developed, or at least emphasized developing a couple of these players, but it never really felt like, especially after the incredible turnover of the roster at the trade deadline, that there was really a style or an identity to this team. And it was very difficult to find one because of the disparate nature of the size of the players, how much smaller the backcourt was. That was one of the smallest backcourts you're going to find. Not only Yuki at 5'7", but Sexton 6'3", Dillingham 6'1". You're playing. Trey Jones is 6'1". A lot of small guards. So it was very difficult to create and nurture an identity of this particular roster. I think you're starting to see a little bit of shape, in terms of the size that some of these core players or projected core players might look like. So, I think you do have to gear that head coaching hire, not necessarily towards somebody who says, I have to play this way, but I think the best coaches in any sport, and this calls for the NFL and the NBA in particular, they gear their system towards the personnel that they have. And I think the coach has to be a little bit more flexible. So would that make me think that they're going to look towards a younger coach or maybe like a more established assistant around the league to try to help grow with these guys. That's where I would lean. That's not based in discussions or anything like that. That's just kind of my reading of the tea leaves, that might be a good direction to go in. Or if you feel like, hey, we have a culture that we really want to establish, I know the guy that I want to bring in, that might be the case. But I think kind of creating a shape and identity that you can really lean into based on the personnel that you have is a really big key for a lot of teams across the league, and the Bulls are part of that.
The Bulls have started to pull away from, bringing back the old names, whether it was, not bringing back Matt Lloyd for the position that Bryson Graham now has. A Tom Thibodeau, Steve Kerr before he re-signed. We'd love to bring back the old names, but it seems like they are willing to go with something new and fresh and young. So what are some of those names, Adam? Like, who are the hot names we're hearing right now?
I mean, I know Mike Nori was a very popular name, coming out of Minnesota. A couple of the Thunder assistants naturally are going to get a look. San Antonio, their lead assistant, is going to get a little bit of a look as well. I think if I wanted to go with somebody that was like a little bit more established, maybe you look at a Sam Cassell, is a longtime NBA veteran, champion in the league, and has been, I think, 17, almost 20 years basically as an NBA assistant for some very high level coaches. And I've always kind of contended in my years of covering the league, the decade I've covered the league, that he's probably a guy that deserves a real shot to run a program. But I also understand what we just talked about. Do you want to go with somebody that's a little bit more used to a rebuilding process? And that's why I looked at Mike Nori very closely, and I've always had a respect for him. There was a time, I can't remember if it was last season or 2 years ago, where Chris Finch, the head coach of the Timberwolves, got taken out and like he had like a torn ACL or something and got into a collision on the sideline. So he had to step away. And I thought Mike Nori did a great job. And Mike is very accessible. He does like the halftime interviews on the Timberwolves broadcast. Like he'll jump in and talk with the reporter and then go into the locker room, and just hearing small snippets of people and getting a sense for their personality, I always felt was kind of important, just to have a little bit of sense of what their philosophy is. I thought he handled it very, very well. We were talking about the Thunder. I don't know if, Mark Daigneault has done a great job, but do you look at one of the guys on their staff, or do you look at like a Dave Bliss or somebody like that? I think the other part of this too is, who are you going to get in terms of like support personnel? I was really disappointed when Peter Patton was let go, and I think a lot of people around the organization were disappointed when Peter Patton, who was the shooting coach for the Bulls and did really good work with Josh Giddey and with Ayo Dosunmu, and was let go kind of unceremoniously and went to New York and helped out Josh Hart, who's turned into a 40+% three-point shooter. Chip England's a longtime shooting coach, was with San Antonio and Popovich forever. He's been with the Thunder the last few years. Fred Vinson, who was in New Orleans, and obviously there's a New Orleans connection here with Bryson Graham and the great work he did with Lonzo Ball, basically rebuilding his shot. He went to Detroit. Vincent helped a lot of those guys out. I think those positions are very important too, and kind of getting support personnel that are really going to develop. Your development coaches and your skill coaches, I think, are really, really important too, not just getting the big splashy head coach hire or the under the radar, diamond in the rough. I think those support positions are really, really important too.
I think that's a really good point. Shifting gears to the draft, how important is it that the Bulls hit on their next face of the franchise in this draft? This is a stacked draft, especially at the top. There seems to be a clear top four. And now, like you mentioned at the start, the Bulls are likely going to have their decision made for them. So how important is it that player who falls into their lap at 4 ends up being the guy for the next decade?
I think it's a lot of pressure to put on anybody, and even somebody like an AJ DeBanso is the number, who's more than likely kind of the overwhelming favorite to go number 1. I still don't think you can just put DeBanso in and go, well, now our entire future is set. Like I don't know if you have that player either, and I'm looking at Wembanyama as the definition of that for this decade. Like Victor Wembanyama is a true unicorn. He was so obviously going to be the number 1 pick. He was so obviously a unique player, a truly a unicorn type of player. He's one of one. Nobody is that height, with that skill set, with that level of understanding, with that level of maturity. Like that was a clear cut number 1. I know a lot of people are kind of making the joke about, well, Patrick Williams was the last time the Bulls had a number 4 pick, and he hasn't obviously panned out in terms of production to money value. That's a fact. That's just a tangible thing we can say. But I also think that was a difficult draft, to give a little bit of defense to that previous regime. That was a difficult draft to jump into. That was your first pick. The top 3 in that draft, by the way, were kind of defined, right? Like you were just talking about, Jason, you're absolutely right. The top 4 in this draft, maybe with a little bit of shifting at number 4, maybe Acuff is somebody that could sneak in, or, instead of a Caleb Wilson or a Cam Boozer or whatever. But that draft in 2020, like everybody kind of felt it's going to be Edwards, Wiseman, and Ball in some order. And then it was kind of a crapshoot. The Bulls went with Patrick Williams, and whether, however you want to judge that pick, feel free to do so. That may degree depending, that may vary in terms of degrees and how you feel about that. But that was a little bit and that was the COVID draft, and that was a little bit difficult to figure out. This draft is kind of more obvious, right? Your decision's going to be made for you. I think the biggest thing is not to base everything on this one pick. That number 15 pick is really important too.
Exactly that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, and the 2 picks in the second round are important, whether you keep them or use them to try to maneuver around for future draft picks or personnel or whatever it may be. Like, all of these things are important, maybe not to equaling degrees. Obviously, the number 4 pick is the most important thing you're going to do here. But like I said, it's probably going to be figured out for you. If Debansa, Peterson, and Boozer go top 3, you're probably going to pick Caleb Wilson. So, because it's going to be best available player. And to me, those are your best 4 players in this draft. So the Bulls are in a wonderful position in that sense. The goal is to create a structure, have an infrastructure for this organization that's been missing probably for the last 3 seasons for sure, and maybe a little bit further back if you want to deep dive into it. The most important thing is to create an infrastructure with the coaches, with the culture, with the type of character players that you want to bring in. I do think, as we've discussed a lot, this is a good group, or has been a really good group of guys. Like, the chemistry has been pretty high. I know that was affected after all the trades, the White and Dosunmu trades and Vucevic, the kind of culture guys of this organization. But this is a chance for Josh Giddey and Modest Buzelis in particular to set a tone for, hey, this is how we want to operate. I'm watching the White Sox right now, and man, they seem to really enjoy each other. It's a bunch of young guys who all kind of came up together and are creative. I think they were hanging out at like Bevy after their Sunday game, right? Like they all went out and hung out and had a good time and were eating and drinking and dancing. And like, that's the type of culture you want for a bunch of young players that hopefully will be together for 3 or 4 or maybe 5 seasons as a group. So I think that is almost more important. The player is going to be good. Whoever you get at number 4 is going to be good. Who are you going to get at 15? Are you going to use that pick to make a trade for somebody that you feel like you feel a little bit more confident in? I've read about, the Kaman Malawach situation, a player that I think even the previous regime was very attracted to as a potential player. I was certainly a big fan of him in college. He's a Luol Deng product. Do you use that number 15 pick and say, hey, I know what I'm getting with Kaman Malawach. Let me give Phoenix the number 15 pick and get Malawach and something else back? Is that an option to go to? I think the infrastructure is almost more important than the player himself, because more than likely what you're going to get. I would rather focus on how are you going to develop that player? Who are the coaches that are going to be tasked with building the skill set, the NBA skill set of that particular player? And how do you get in a coach and a staff that create an infrastructure and a culture that is going to be appealing not only to this particular group, but maybe to future players that want to come or that are looking for a home and want to go play somewhere that they're going to enjoy? You got to turn that around too, because I don't think Chicago has necessarily been like a major free agent destination for a while. So if that's not the case, all right, well, the next couple of years are going to be bad money contracts and a bunch of young players. How do you develop those guys and then create something for the future?
Adam, thank you so much. I mean, we have a month and a half to talk about this, to speculate, but I'm with you. I agree. I think that watching more Bryson Graham's next moves and how he builds this front office, builds the coaching staff, will give us a little bit more idea of what the Bulls of 2027 are going to look like. So Thank you so much for taking the time. And before we let you go, when is your next singing engagement?
maybe an anthem at some point. I admitted to Peggy on the radio that at some point in my lifetime, I would like to sing the national anthem at a Chicago sporting event. So we'll make that happen at some point in the future.
That's awesome.
I'm going to keep saying it over and over until you let us know that someone reached out to you. We would love it.
You got it.
Thank you so much, Adam. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
All right. That's Adam Amin joining us. He is the Bulls play-by-play announcer, also on Fox Sports doing NFL and MLB games. Jason, there's a lot to talk about, but we do have a month and a half. So I do think that it's pretty important this time around to take a look at more what the next moves are by Bryson Graham and the coach that he brings in, because you can't screw up that first pick at 4 overall, but it sure does make the 15th pick very interesting.
Yeah, you can't screw up the 4th pick. You can't screw up what you do with the 15th pick, whether it be shifting it for other assets or taking, another core piece, a player that complements that 4th pick really well. And then lastly, and arguably, maybe most importantly, as Adam alluded to, the coaching hire you really have to hit on, because Billy Donovan's a great coach, but it just didn't work out in Chicago. Fred Hoiberg's a great coach, but it just didn't work out in Chicago. Jim Boylan just overall didn't work out in Chicago. That's 3 straight coaching hires that pretty much fell flat for the Chicago Bulls. So now this one you really need to hit on, at least, in my mind. This next coaching hire needs to accomplish at least what Tom Thibodeau did in his tenure in Chicago. Maybe Tom Thibodeau comes back. I don't think that's the best idea, but if he does, at least you have somebody who has proven that they can win in Chicago.
Well, and we also know that Bryson Graham comes from a background in which they have unearthed some really good players in the middle of the draft, like is it Trey Murphy?
Trey Murphy, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dyson Daniels, he is an expert at picking in the range of 8 to 16, which unfortunately is right where the Bulls have been picking, really the last 5 years. So you hope after this draft that's not the case. So hopefully he hits on these 2 picks and the Bulls have that future core in place. But hey, there's a whole lot of basketball decisions to be made between now and then, between the coaching staff and current personnel on the team.
I have a shocking admission to give you. This was actually really fun talking about the Bulls.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah. I mean, yesterday I think was just such a relieving day for those of us who grew up watching the Bulls, really value Chicago basketball, because the last few years have really stunk, not just for the Bulls, but overall in Chicago sports. And so now for these last 12 to 18 months, this turnaround between the Cubs postseason run, the Bears postseason run, the White Sox turning things around, now it's the Bulls' turn. And so hopefully they make a good coaching hire. The pick at 4 is going to excite the fan base, whether it be Wilson or Boozer or Acuff. I've staked my claim to Wilson. I hope that that's who the pick is. But really any of the 3, I think fans can get excited about. And then like we've mentioned a lot today, that 15th pick is really important. It's kind of that gift from the basketball gods that pick conveyed in this draft. Like, Bulls got double good luck this draft, the one draft where you needed it, so they can't screw it up.
All right, this has been a lot of fun. Don't forget to follow us, join us. Whether you are watching us on YouTube or listening to us wherever you get your podcasts, including the ESPN Chicago app, please continue to do so as we continue our relaunch of the Sportscaster and her son. We're really the 2 sportscasters now, but because we are mother and son, we like to argue and fight, but we haven't been, Jason. Like, this has gotten, we're being too nice to each other.
Yeah, I guess so. I haven't wished you a happy Mother's Day yet.
You must be maturing.
I haven't wished you a happy Mother's Day yet. This is our usually we do like a little Mother's Day thing, but
yeah, we didn't do it.
Wait, whatever. Just kind of came and went this year.
Oh, wow. Thanks. All right. That does it for this episode. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll talk to you next week. Take care.
See you later, Mom.
Bye.